When yet another star shower manifests over Northrend, the warriors of darkness find themselves under attack from mysterious spectral foes, who, by all appearances, are being summoned forth with the selfsame magic the Crystal Exarch employs, a magic that should lie beyond even the Ascience's ken. Seeking to take the battle away from innocent civilians, the heroes flee Yulmore in an airship, setting course for the Crystarium. Hey guys, it's Mith from Millennium Fantasy, and welcome back to another episode of Mith Chats. Today is a special episode because today is the actual first time I was playing patch 5.3. My footage here is completely blind. I'm looking back at this afterwards, a few days after. I recently just cleared patch 5.3 content, and oh my god, that was some emotional stuff going on there. But let's dive into those thoughts a bit later on in a different video. We'll try and focus this part more so on the actual dungeon, the lore going on in the dungeon, the some commentary on the bosses and what's happening and what you could do to make sure you survive. And also, finally, some thoughts about what I think about this dungeon and, how it compares to some of the other dungeons we have in Shadowbringers. Also, I'm going to comment a bit on some stuff happening with the channel. I'll get one thing out of the way right away because I want to know what you guys think. I'm really contemplating on doing some stuff with another Final Fantasy game. I actually made this channel with the idea of I kind of want to do them all and sort of document my journey as someone who only jumped in Final Fantasy maybe half a year ago, right? And what I want to know from you guys, and please let me know in the comments below, is which one should I start with? There's a few, games I'm eyeing at this point. Some theory I read, I think it was on Reddit, that you should start with the lowest one you feel comfortable playing. And judging by that theory, I'm sort of thinking about either Final Fantasy 3 or Final Fantasy 4. More so towards 4 maybe. But yeah, I've been eyeing 6. I've been eyeing 15 actually, because another theory says you should just start at the top and then work your way down. Don't worry about the 14 content, that will still keep going, especially I was on holiday for a few weeks. So my content schedule was a bit less loose. Even though I made a few stuff beforehand and uploaded it, it wasn't as much as I would have liked it to be in a normal week. But I am back home, so good to see you guys and good to talk to you again. In the meantime, we are running through Armorang, or at least what I think is Armorang, being constantly harassed by these, spectral heroes from another world, warriors of light that have been summoned by Elidibus and are trying to kill us. And we're trying to get from Yulmore, and we just got dropped out of an airship in Armorang, and we're trying to get to the Crystarium. Now we reached the first boss, the Spectral Thief, which is obviously a play to some of the jobs that are in some of the other Final Fantasy games. There's a few interesting things here, of which the most interesting one you just saw, that I just got hit by. You see the thief is sort of placing a marker somewhere else on the platform, and he has this AoE circle around him. The thing is that first he will sprint towards the marker, and then the circle will go off. So you need to sort of pre-plan your positioning a bit before that happens. But once you know it, then you'll be fine. Just get away from the circles, pretty much, from the markers that he will dash to. We have some AoE markers, we have some raid-wide damage, there's a tank buster. So it's all pretty, things we've seen before, except for maybe the dash marker here. So here we see some AoE lines going around. And we have two markers this time, with a line AoE, which is a slightly different variant on the ability we were just talking about, with the dash and then he does an ability. So instead of an AoE circle, this time it's an AoE line. Just get out of it, and you saw an additional copy of him actually being teleported to a different marker. So there's two markers that you sort of need to dodge. But once you see it, then it's pretty easy to actually play with. So don't worry about that. There's some more AoE lines, some stuff to dodge, some markers. Here we see the markers again that are gonna get dashed to. So there's one to our left, there's one to our right. They dash, they do their AoE circle, and we're almost done. So as I say, once you got, you know, in your head what the actual markers do, just as with pretty much any other marker that has a signiful, you know, one of these typical things, you'll be fine. So yeah, we'll kill the Spectral Thief, and then we'll go on to the second part of this beautiful dungeon. So far, obviously, they are, you know, glimpses of zones we've already seen. So I'm not gonna say it is particularly original in a sense. You know, obviously the sky is very impressive. I don't have a scene around here with the sky, but if you look up, then you'll see all these, you know, the star shower that we were talking about at the beginning of the video. So that's definitely something impressive. I'm actually getting a piece of loot here because it's slightly better than what I have. Because it drops 475 gear. So if you guys aren't on that level yet for some of your pieces, then doing this dungeon might be interesting for you. So now we go to our second zone, and we were just in Amarang, and now we're actually going to Ilmeg. So we see some of our, you know, some old friends, some of the pixies. We see the frog guy from the... I don't recall what the dungeon's name is, but the yeah, the frog dungeon. Let's just call it that way. Obviously, our tank is, you know, doing about 2 pulls at a time, which is a decent pace for us. So, and there's all these, you know, jobs, references to other jobs that are made here that we are just mass killing. In terms of trash, there isn't too much interesting other than, you know, the odd AoE circle, what have you. It's all pretty much the same in all of the Shadowbringers dungeons so far, in my opinion, in terms of trash at least. So here's, you know, this cone thing, and then there's an AoE circle, and you know what it means. So obviously all these guys are warriors of light from other, you know, shards, and they're trying to, you know, kill the warrior of darkness, if that's what it means. So we have this cool little flower bridge that's, you know, that was in one of the screenshots on the website we were talking about. And now we are continuing on to the rest of the dungeon. So we have this cool little bridge going on, and now we're going on to the rest of Ilmeg. Again, more summon circles. There's some ink mages here, which is definitely something else than a red or blue or white mage. So that's an interesting job. I've heard some stories about some job speculation for jobs in the future. And a lot of people are referencing the 3 bosses in this instance. So we have the Thief, we were just talking about. The second boss, I'll let you know when we get there. And the third boss is another possible job in the future. I'm not really sure if that's gonna be, you know, the new jobs in the new expansion. I think some of the references that were made during the story make sort of a better indication of what could be happening. But we'll discuss that later. For now, we'll do some more trash. We're in a cool zone of Ilmeg. We have some of our tree friends here to help us out. I think that's a little bit of a reference to the Titania fight, if I remember correctly, with the big tree guys, but I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what's happening. And now we continue on to the second boss, which is actually also covered in some of the arts we saw on the patch 5.3 site. So a very cool model, obviously. And this one actually has a bit more interesting mechanics. So there's obviously the, you know, we have our tank buster. You just saw this giant cone. We have some raid-wide damage. But now we have 4 zombies spawning, and each one of those is tethered to one of the players. And they just, you know, they auto-attack you for a few seconds, and then they drop dead. And afterwards, what will happen is that the zombies will explode. And you will get some of the vulnerability stacks. But obviously, since this is my first time, I don't really realize that, so I'm just gonna stand in the zombie explosion. But as you see, it's not the most painful part, but there is some invulnerability, so really do be careful about that stuff. There's some more AoE puddles that you should be careful for. Here are some more zombies spawning with the tethers. So Yeah, and these are actually different kinds of zombies, and there's some AoE circles. So make sure you don't stand close to each other. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on at this point. And then we get hit by the crawling zombies rather than the walking zombies. But yeah, the damage is pretty decent at this point. There's some AoE damage. But once we get, you know, a few iterations of this fight, we can actually go on. Now we have some more walking zombies, as you can see. So these will just auto-attack us, and afterwards they will explode. And we have actually some more crawling zombies as well at the same time. So let's make sure we don't get hit by too much. But exactly at that point we kill the boss, so that's not too... I have the feeling that a lot of these bosses would be a bit more interesting if they iterated a bit quicker, because now I have the feeling that you kill them before they kill you, more so than anything else. And if that's not tightly tuned, then yeah, it's a pretty easy boss in my opinion. So that was the Spectral Necromancer, the second boss of the Heroes Gauntlet. And now we actually got to teleport to Lakeland, and we have some references to some of our other friends. But obviously Lakeland is sort of the last, you know, zone we need to go through until we get to the area. So we have one more boss ahead of us. It's a pretty short dungeon in my opinion. Obviously, as I said before, the trash is pretty bland. But the bosses are interesting in my opinion. But that makes for, you know, the trash is just there as a filler to sort of have something to do while you're looking at the interesting, you know, routes that you're walking. But other than that, the trash don't really serve any purpose in my opinion. So in terms, before we get to the last boss and close this off, I'll, you know, speak of some of my thoughts compared to the other dungeons. I think it's an interesting experiment for a dungeon. You know, we've seen some of these dungeons in some of the other MMOs we've covered here. You know, World of Warcraft had a few of these story-driven, you know, walk through a few zones. I'm thinking about Dragon Soul. There's, you know, there's some other variations. So it's definitely an interesting experiment, and I think it is done pretty well here. But I must say, after you've done it once, and this is probably generally true for some of the more story-oriented dungeons, you know, you've seen it. And I'm not so appalled by some of the mechanics that I think, wow, what a dungeon. But, you know, I'm not the biggest dungeon guy because they don't provide some of the challenge that some of the raids do. You know, if it was more of a competitive edge to this kind of stuff, then that would be more interesting. But so far that isn't the case. But I don't want to hate on this dungeon. I think it is, in terms of aesthetics, it's beautifully done. The sound is, again, cool. You know, the story it flows into it is actually pretty cool as well. I think they had a good reason to make this dungeon, if that makes sense. It isn't just dropped on your face. I think this pack is a bit weird because, you know, you think you're done and then out of nowhere you get another summon with 3 mobs and that's it. So could have, you know, you could have maybe turned that one away. But other than that, in terms of compared to some of the other dungeons we've seen in Shadowbringers, definitely cool, but there's a little less mystery around it, if that makes sense. You know, we know why these guys are coming in. We know what we have to do. We have to get to the Crystarium to make sure we can stop Elidibus. We know who these mobs are. We know why they are trying to kill us. So therefore, yeah, that's why we're here. So let's continue on to the final boss. Is it time? Or am I speaking too soon? There we go. The last arena. And now our last mob is actually the interesting... And this might actually be a really interesting, you know, next new job, in my opinion. Because we had the Spectral Thief, we had the Spectral Necromancer, and now we have our third boss, Distant Ideal Spectral Berserker. Interesting, but he looks really, you know, he looks really mad. Not gonna lie. Alright, so here's some basic mechanics, and there's some interesting ones as well. So we have some raid-wide AoE damage. Obviously, some of my group members started before I was still looking at the cinematic thing there, so that's that can happen. So we have some raid-wide damage. Obviously, we have this little cross arena, so make sure you don't stand outside that because that will hurt you. There's some line AoE in front that you saw just as we go. Here's the AoE damage. For the line AoE, he does them 2 times in a row, and then afterwards he'll do them 3 times in a row. And now he'll have this little stack-ish marker where he'll jump, and then he'll knock back everyone from that marker. So you need to get sort of close to it. Afterwards, we have these AoE markers that we don't need to stack on top of another. And this is an interesting part, because now you get the stack markers. But the thing is, you need to stack with your stone, but not with each other. So that can be pretty confusing at first. I mean, I was just looking at my teammates here. As I said, I'm doing this blindly. But I was just copying my teammates here. So it's not... If someone knows what they're doing, then it's fine. But if you don't know what you're doing, then that might be a thing to look out for. So at this point he's doing a big all attack, and at this point we need to stand within the crater that he made. It's called Wild Rampage, and it stacks vulnerability as well, so make sure you're standing in the crater where that happens. Obviously when you're standing in the crater you get the debuff you just saw called a Mith Berserker. Let me show you it right now, actually, because we're gonna get a second crater before we kill him. If you stand in the crater too long, then what will happen here again is that you see the marker above your head as well. If it fills up, if it gets 8, then what will happen, you'll have mind control, which will let you hit the boss, but it will hurt you a lot. So make sure you don't stand in the crater too long, pretty much. Here we have some more of the rocks with the stack marker. Don't stack with your friends, but stack with your pet rock in this case. Other than that, again, the damage on the boss is high enough to not make this, you know, super hard with some of the pits all over the arena and stuff like that, which could have happened if you're playing this a bit longer. But that's it, the Spectral Berserker. So we have 3 sort of jobs, possible jobs for the future, but I don't think these ones are the ones that are going to actually make it. I have a bit my sights set on some other hints that were given in the story here. But we'll talk about that later. So that was the dungeon. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Mith Chats. It was a pretty short episode because of the short length of the dungeon, but always good. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe. And as I asked before, in the comments, let me know what you guys think is a good Final Fantasy game to cover in this channel as well. So what is a good Final Fantasy game to start with if you're completely new to the series, if you've only played 14? In my case, no other game I've ever played. So let me know what's, you know, with the goal of kind of playing all of them, except for maybe 2. Yeah, we'll have a talk about that. Alright, so guys, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you soon. Take care.